What would you do if you witnessed one of the most beloved athletes in the world face an unbelievable act of injustice? This is the story of Simone Biles, a quiet flight and a confrontation that would leave an entire plane questioning what's right. Stay with us to uncover how courage and unity changed everything. Simone Biles settled into her first-class seat, her petite frame barely filling the luxurious chair. The hum of passengers boarding filled the cabin as she gazed out the window, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the tarmac. After weeks of grueling training, this flight was her first moment of peace, a chance to disappear into the background like any other passenger, or so she thought. Out of nowhere, a sharp voice sliced through the air like a whip. "Excuse me, but what is she doing here?" Simone turned, startled by the aggression. Standing in the aisle was the pilot, his piercing gaze fixed on her. His voice carried the kind of edge that made everyone stop what they were doing. "I'm sorry," Simone said, her voice calm but confused. "Is there a problem?" The pilot crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Yes, there is. People like you don't belong in first class. This isn't some charity handout." The cabin fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A woman gasped audibly, while others fumbled for their phones, the glow of camera screens flickering to life. Simone's heart clenched not for herself, but for the ugliness in the man's voice. She'd faced adversity before, but this was different. It wasn't just rude, it was deeply personal. She took a breath, her calm exterior masking the storm brewing inside her. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the tension, "I purchased this ticket like everyone else here. I have every right to sit in this seat." The pilot leaned closer, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he stormed toward the cockpit, leaving a trail of uneasy murmurs in his wake. Simone exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. Around her, passengers whispered furiously. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with thinly veiled disdain. The brewing storm. Minutes later, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security concern, we'll be experiencing a brief delay." Simone froze, the meaning behind his words sinking in. Security concern? This wasn't just about humiliation, it was a calculated move. He was trying to paint her as a threat, justifying his actions with a thin veil of authority. The cabin erupted into whispers, speculation spreading like wildfire. Two uniformed security officers entered the plane, their presence sending a ripple of unease through the passengers. They moved deliberately down the aisle, stopping in front of Simone. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice professional but firm, "we need you to come with us." Simone's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. "Can you explain why?" she asked, her voice steady but loud enough for others to hear. "We've been informed of a potential issue," the officer said vaguely. An older woman, seated a few rows away, stood up, her hands trembling with fury. "This is outrageous," she exclaimed. "That young woman has been sitting there quietly this whole time. She hasn't done anything wrong." Her outburst emboldened others. A man in a business suit raised his voice. "Yeah, I've been here the entire time too. She hasn't done a thing. This is clearly a mistake." The officers exchanged uncertain glances, caught off guard by the vocal support. Simone remained seated, her calm demeanor masking the whirlwind of emotions inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about standing up to the injustice unfolding before everyone's eyes. A tense confrontation. The pilot's face was a mix of anger and determination as he stormed back into the cabin, his voice cutting through the uneasy murmurs. "This flight isn't leaving until she's off," he barked, pointing directly at Simone. His eyes flared with defiance, as if daring anyone to challenge him. Simone stood slowly, every move deliberate and controlled, though inside her chest her heart thundered. She wasn't just facing an individual now, she was facing an idea, toxic one that she knew couldn't go unchallenged. "And why is that?" she asked, her voice steady but firm enough for the entire cabin to hear. The cabin was utterly silent, every passenger's attention fixed on the unfolding scene. His bravado faltered for a split second, but his stubbornness quickly took over. "You think you're special?" he spat. "Not on my plane." Simone took a small step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "This isn't your plane," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. "It belongs to the airline, and as far as I know, airlines follow policies, not personal vendettas. So again, what rule have I broken? Tell everyone here." The pilot's face reddened as the weight of her words hit him. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Around them, passengers started whispering more boldly, some leaning forward in their seats, others holding their phones higher to capture every second. A man in the back of the cabin, older with a commanding presence, rose to his feet. His deep voice carried easily across the tense space. "That's Simone Biles," he said, pointing toward her. "One of the greatest athletes in the world, and you're trying to throw her off this flight? For what?" Gasps rippled through the cabin. The pilot visibly tensed, his authority slipping as recognition dawned on the passengers. Simone, meanwhile, stood rooted, her expression calm but resolute. She wasn't seeking sympathy, nor did she want her name to define the moment. She wanted fairness, nothing more. A woman seated 2 rows ahead turned around, her voice trembling with anger. "This is unbelievable. She's been nothing but polite. You're the one disrupting this flight." The tide began to turn. More passengers raised their voices, their whispers growing into a unified murmur of dissent. "Leave her alone! She didn't do anything wrong. This is discrimination." The pilot took a step back, his confidence visibly shaken, but he wasn't ready to concede. His hand balled into a fist, his frustration spilling over. "I don't care who she is," he snapped. "I run this plane, and I don't need to explain myself to anyone." A young woman holding her phone raised it higher, her voice clear and steady despite the tension. "We're all watching," she said. "And recording? The whole world will see how you're treating her." Her words struck a nerve. The pilot's gaze darted to the glowing screens of passengers' phones, his composure crumbling further under the weight of public scrutiny. Yet he still clung to his authority, desperate to maintain control. Before he could respond, one of the security officers stepped forward. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable firmness. "Captain, with all due respect, you need to stand down," he said. "You're creating a disturbance and jeopardizing the safety of this flight." The pilot turned on the officer, his voice rising in pitch. "I'm jeopardizing the flight? Are you kidding me? She's the one who doesn't belong here." The officer didn't flinch. "Sir, our job is to ensure the safety and comfort of every passenger. Right now, you're the one creating a situation. If this continues, we'll have no choice but to remove you." The pilot's face twisted in disbelief. "You're taking her side?" he hissed. "We're taking the side of what's right," the officer replied, his tone unwavering. A ripple of applause broke out from the passengers, their collective frustration turning into a vocal show of support for Simone. The older man who had spoken earlier stepped into the aisle, his expression sharp and determined. "Captain," he said, his voice filled with quiet authority, "you've embarrassed yourself enough. Step aside before this gets worse for you and for everyone else here." The pilot's jaw clenched tightly as he looked around the cabin. Every face was against him, every phone was pointed at him, and every word he had spoken was already being recorded. His world was crumbling in real time. "Fine," he spat, his voice dripping with bitterness. "But this isn't over." With that, he turned and marched back toward the cockpit, slamming the door behind him. For a moment, the cabin was completely still, the air thick with tension. Then, as if a collective breath had been released, the passengers broke into applause. Simone sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. The elderly man who had spoken up for her approached, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You handled yourself well," he said softly. "Bullies like him thrive on fear, but you didn't give him the satisfaction." Simone looked up at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," she replied. "Thank you." As the applause died down, a flight attendant approached Simone, her face filled with emotion. "Miss Biles," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know." Simone offered a faint smile. "You don't need to apologize for him," she said, "but thank you for your kindness." The intercom crackled to life, the pilot's voice tense but subdued. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff. I apologize for the delay." As the plane ascended, Simone felt the tension in her shoulders ease, though the memory of the confrontation lingered. Around her, passengers exchanged supportive smiles and nods. The ordeal had ended, but the message it carried was far from over. Simone glanced out the window as the plane climbed higher into the sky. She didn't just feel relief, she felt a quiet determination. Some battles aren't chosen, she thought, but they still need to be fought. A victory for justice. By the time the plane landed, videos of the confrontation had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, and hashtags like "Justice for Simone" and "Equality in the Sky" trended worldwide. Crowds of reporters and supporters gathered at the terminal, cheering as Simone disembarked. One reporter pushed forward, microphone in hand. "Simone, what do you have to say about what happened on the flight?" Simone paused, her voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about standing up to injustice wherever it happens. No one should ever be made to feel less than human. We're stronger when we stand together." The crowd erupted into applause. That night, as Simone scrolled through countless messages of support, she realized something profound. Battles like these weren't just about winning, they were about courage. And sometimes, it's the moments we don't choose that define who we are. This isn't just Simone's story, it's a reminder that standing up for what's right can inspire those around us. If this story moved you or made you think, let us know in the comments. There are so many more stories like this that deserve to be heard. Stay with us by following this channel, and together, let's keep shining a light on courage, resilience, and justice.